While the crowd was pressing in on Jesus and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw two boats there alongside the lake. The fishermen had disembarked and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, he asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. After he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Simon said in reply, "Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing, but at your command I will lower the nets." When they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets were tearing. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come help them. They came and filled the boats so that the boats were in danger of sinking. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at the knees of Jesus and said, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For astonishment at the catch of fish they had made seized him and all those with him, and likewise James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners of Simon. Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." When they brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I feel a great sense of calm and peace and trust as I read this Gospel. It seems that all the planets have aligned in the words here. Because when you first walk into Mundelein, one of the first places you'll go to be oriented is the St. John Paul II Chapel. And in Latin, above Mary, is the words Nolite timere, which in Latin, you all remember your Latin? That's okay. Good job. You remember. Do not be afraid. And then over Joseph, the words Duc in altum, which is put out into the deep. And these two phrases are what Bishop Robert Barron wanted all of his seminarians to see every single day, right above Mary and Joseph and the tabernacle and the crucifix. So these two phrases both appear in this passage. Do not be afraid. I've preached this before, and I continue to preach it because I still need to hear it. Said over and over in the Bible, do not be afraid. Take courage. Don't be afraid. Fear not. And all that means nothing to me because I'm still afraid. But then when I realize that the translation means you're going to be afraid and you're going to be scared, but don't let that stop you from walking forward. And so I think that's a very appropriate message to tell seminarians, to tell future priests. The second line is put out into the deep. Duc in altum. Put out into the deep. What do you have to lose? Well, a lot, actually. If you go out too deep, you don't really know. In the Lake of Galilee, you don't really know how the wind and water is going to affect it. Storms would come up quite often because of just the valley and the bowl that happens there, and it would kind of overturn ships and people would die. If you go out too deep and put your nets down, you might lose hold of them and not be able to swim to go get them. You don't know how the fish behave out there, and so they might not even come by your net. You could fall overboard and drown. So there's a lot to be lost and a lot to risk by going out into the deep. But as we can see from this passage, the tired Peter and his friends who had been working, he even gives an excuse, which is what we're all great at. Go out, put out into the deep, and lower your nets for a catch. When they trusted Jesus in this risky and absurd command. They brought back more fish than they knew what to do with, to eat, to sell. They couldn't even get them all ashore because they were all about to sink. So I think of how Jesus breaks into all our cycles of fear and our cycles of daily life and our cycles of status quo, things as they are. Before they met Jesus, they would go down to the lake, pick up fish, just enough fish for them, both of them in the boat. They would eat some, they would sell the rest, and have zero fish. And then go back out the next day, do the whole thing over again. Just enough to scrape by with their family and their little fishing business. But now, they have more fish than 6 of these men, not just 2, can handle. Look at all the money we're going to make off these. Look at all the people we can feed. Look at all our families aren't going to have to be hungry anymore. But the gospel passage doesn't say anything about the 4 boats that were breaking and the nets that were tearing. All it says is they left everything and followed him. We don't know what happened to that fish, those boats. That was their entire livelihood, was their nets and their boats. Perhaps they stayed on shore, rotted. I would assume probably poor of the area came up, collected the food, sold the nets, sold the fish. But the gospel doesn't tell us because we don't need to know. Everything we think we know, everything we love, and everything that we rely on, we leave behind and follow Jesus out into the deep. And it is scary. Being a Christian is one of the scariest things you could do. And it's putting out into the deeps of faith, the deeps of trust, the deeps of suffering. But when we go out into the deep with Christ, we bring back more spiritual goods and more graces than we even know what to do with, which others can then feed on, take, and sell. But we don't count that cost because we're already following him and our backs are to everything we left. This is the type of invitation, this is the type of inspiration that came upon me when I first walked in that chapel, the St. John Paul II chapel at Mundelein. And as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young seminarian who's going to take over the world, conquer the world for Christ, and then emerging as a 4th theologian, deacon, a senior, bruised but wiser, I feel like I can continue to go out into the deep with him. And even though it's scary, we still bring back so much more than we could ever count. And so I invite you all to go out into the deep with me. One of the ways that you can do that is by receiving the Eucharist and take it back to shore with you. There will definitely be enough to share.